Every creature on Earth can be seen leaving their mark on the planet in their own special ways. Crows like making little collections of various shiny objects, beavers like building dams of sticks and foliage over little woodland streams, and humans like to indiscriminately cover vast areas with tarmac. The sheer scale of industry on our planet has made us realise the damage it can cause when left unchecked, and no place is more potentially damaging to the environment than a city. These concentrated areas of infrastructure, industry, and consumers can be incredibly costly to the environment, along with many other factors such as the health of the city's inhabitants. This is why there has been a gradual shift to environmental sustainability throughout the end of the 20th century, going into the 21st century. It is extremely important for the continued survival of our planet, and lots of policies have been made to increase the environmental sustainability of cities. The cities that will be mentioned in this video include Boston and London, each of which being studied respectively for the Big Dig project and ULEZ zone. In this video, I aim to explain these environmental policies, and evaluate how they could be implemented into a city that still has a lot of progress to make when it comes to its environmental sustainability. Los Angeles is a definite example of a city that heavily relies upon cars and other environmentally unsustainable means. The metropolitan area of Los Angeles has the 5th highest carbon footprint in the world and the 2nd highest in the country, but has a relatively smaller population than other cities with similar carbon footprints. The region itself is also very vulnerable to the effects of climate change, present and future, so it is extremely important that Los Angeles reduces their carbon footprint to avoid projected climate hazards, such as extreme heat, sea level rises, extreme precipitation and flooding, wildfires and drought. To achieve this reduction in carbon footprint and save Los Angeles from these potentially life-threatening hazards, the city's government will need to adopt policies that minimize its effect on the environment. However, before I list these potential policy changes, I think it is important to understand the roots of its environmental crisis, and how the background and history of the region contributed to it. Los Angeles began as a tiny remote farming community with a modest population of 44 settlers in 1781. The settlement was lacking in any useful resources, and at that point was still positioned relatively far from the coast. Almost 100 years later, in 1870, the settlement experienced a rise in its population due to the high number of people moving for the warmth, open land and job opportunities from the industrial growth. However, it was still missing the resources necessary to establish a thriving city. It had no major fuel source, no natural harbours, unlike most American cities at the time, no railway connections, no lumber source, and not enough fresh water for the growing population. The city remained that way until its next population boom in the early 20th century. This population boom is when the city truly became what it is today, with the construction of roads and highways linking it up to the rest of the country. This allowed for much easier access of people and resources, two factors that were extremely sparse in a pre-automobile California. This shift can be viewed in statistics. For example, in 1900, before the car was introduced to the mainstream US population, California only made up 2% of the country's population. In 1950, after the major adoption of cars into US culture, California made up 7% of the country's population. This goes to show that much of Los Angeles and California was developed with the automobile in mind, and this would contribute to the extremely high carbon footprint that the area has today. Car culture is the designing of infrastructure that favours cars as the superior transport method, as well as the maintaining of car-dependent attitudes that see it as the only viable method of transport, which in most cases is true. Most American cities are designed with this method of transportation in mind, and virtually nothing else. Studies show that around 80% of American drivers say they have no choice but to use cars, which shows the extent of car culture in America as a whole. Car dependency is an issue that is fully present in Los Angeles. Los Angeles has 638 cars per 1,000 inhabitants, a number that is relatively high compared to cities like London, New York, and Hong Kong. Los Angeles also has 6.87 road deaths per 100,000 inhabitants, which is concerningly high compared to London, New York, and Hong Kong. Out of 227 metropolitan areas in America, Los Angeles ranked the worst for air quality. And while this is partially due to the natural climate of the region, the high amounts of car dependency in the area are mostly to blame. The issue with this is the fact that higher pollution levels will encourage people to drive more in order to avoid methods of transportation that results in them breathing more pollutants. For example, cycling, which, as of writing this, the World Health Organization does not currently recommend to sensitive individuals living in Los Angeles. If the issue of high pollution levels in Los Angeles becomes worse, this will become a self-perpetuating cycle, since people will be even less inclined to make journeys through the city on foot. Like I said before, the climate crisis is likely to hit Los Angeles hard if no action is taken. Despite these facts, it is completely possible for Los Angeles to start implementing policies that lowers the city and wider area's carbon footprint. I believe that pre-existing policies in different cities could be utilised by Los Angeles, and it isn't particularly far-fetched to believe that the citizens and government of the city would welcome these new policies either. According to recent polls, 68% of Democrats said that they would strongly support the improvement of public transport in their community, as opposed to only 25% of Republicans. When it comes to the acknowledgement and desire to solve the issue of climate change, Democrats are statistically more inclined, and there are few US cities more democratic than Los Angeles. This is why I believe that it is fully possible for the city to become much more environmentally sustainable, less car dependent, and have a nicer atmosphere in general. It has the potential. In an article by the American Association of Geographers, the author, Stefani Pinchetto, argues that while Los Angeles is often considered as the antithesis of a sustainable city, there are two ways it can evolve. It can either go towards something like Tokyo or Vancouver, integrated, transit-oriented clusters of connected, walkable neighbourhoods, or, as she bluntly puts it, a business-as-usual model that includes a series of dense clusters with walls and gates for the elite, surrounded by slums like Sao Paulo. The drivers of Los Angeles' metropolitan area heavily rely on the maze of highways that link up the endless sprawl of neighborhoods and shops. The central business district of LA has the largest concentration of these highways and is often used as a junction to travel to other sides of the urban sprawl. This means that naturally, the CBD of LA is swarming with traffic, the CBD highways having some of the highest concentration of motor traffic in Los Angeles County. This is a problem. Firstly, it creates a large quantity of carbon emissions, accelerating climate change and making the city centre's air quality poor. Secondly, it creates noise and light pollution, two aspects of city life that, while viewed as the norm, are not good for the physical or mental health of the inhabitants. Thirdly, the highways simply take up space, not to mention the fact that they are impossible and highly illegal to cross, effectively making them a barricade for anyone who isn't a motorist. Now, what if I were to tell you that there was a way to solve all these issues without removing the highways? You could call me an optimist, but that's exactly what a little town in Massachusetts managed to achieve. Boston, like Los Angeles, is located on the coast, all the way on the eastern side of the USA. The city centre was highly populated in the late 20th century, and likewise had a huge amount of traffic, most of which was concentrated on a 6-lane elevated highway that ran through downtown Boston. It was called the Central Artery, and would carry upwards of 200,000 vehicles every day. making it one of the most congested highways in America at the time. Boston's city centre is positioned on a small circular peninsula, so having a huge strip of tarmac cutting it in half and taking up valuable space wasn't particularly great, for many of the same reasons I just explained for Los Angeles. So, in 1982, the Big Dig project officially began. Essentially, the plan was to remove the elevated highway going through downtown Boston and replace it with a tunnel. The project was not cheap, nor easy to execute. It took years for Boston to receive the necessary federal funds. The project covered 7.8 miles of highway, and all the construction took place right in the centre of Boston, so planners had to work extra hard to figure out how to finish the project without crippling the city. When the project was officially finished in 2007, Boston's downtown became very different from its former self in 1982. Firstly, total hours that drivers spent on the new highways was reduced by 62% from 1995 to 2003, leading to a 12% reduction in carbon monoxide emissions citywide. Secondly, the Rose Kennedy Greenway was constructed to fill the now empty space that was taken up by the central artery, meaning that the neighbourhoods that were previously divided by the highway could reconnect, the quality of life increased in central Boston, and the city became generally more attractive. Leftover clay and dirt from the project were repurposed to cover old dumps and landfills all over New England. Overall, the project changed Boston for the better, improving its environment, quality of life, traffic congestion, economy, and many other aspects. Going back to Los Angeles, the Big Dig project could be similarly implemented if given the proper funds and attention. Its success in Boston shows that the project is possible, and economically, environmentally, and socially beneficial to American cities that it is implemented into. So, whereabouts in Los Angeles could this project be replicated? This decision would be surprisingly difficult to make because of how many traffic choke points the city has. If I were to estimate the best way of implementing the Big Dig project into Los Angeles, it would start with tunneling right in the center of Los Angeles, bringing the Bill Keene Memorial Interchange underground, and then gradually expanding outwards down the Harbor Freeway and Hollywood Freeway. After the tunneling is complete, an estimated 50 acres of downtown land will be created. For reference, St. James's Park in London occupies 57 acres of land. Like Boston, Los Angeles would be able to use this land in a multitude of beneficial ways, and the freeing up of this land would help to connect the central Los Angeles districts in a more pedestrianised and streamlined way, helping to bring Stephanie Pinchettel's vision of Los Angeles to life. Building a greenway with plazas and markets would be one of the best options in my opinion, as it would help to make the city centre livelier, encourage people to walk or cycle through the greenway instead of drive, and the green space would help to cool down the city in the particularly warm months of the year, potentially preventing heatwave-related deaths. Due to the recent advancements in technology and climate change awareness, additional funds could be set aside to create a carbon capture system inside the tunnels. When combined with the vegetation on the greenways, the project has the potential to greatly reduce the carbon emissions of Los Angeles. It is without a doubt that carrying out a Big Dig project in LA would significantly improve the quality of life and environment of the city. But this project alone would not be enough to transform Los Angeles into a truly environmentally sustainable city. Firstly, it only targets the city centre, which is only a small portion of the overall metropolitan area. And secondly, it doesn't fundamentally lower the number of commuters who feel like driving is the only viable option. It is also important to mention the price of a Big Dig project in Los Angeles. The original project in Boston costed an estimated $15 billion and caused disruptions and controversy throughout the city and wider area. While LA's hypothetical project would be on a much smaller scale, with only half the amount of tunnel being built, as well as the whole project being carried out over land, as opposed to Boston's, which included the construction of new bridges and tunnels over the harbour. It would still be a multiple billion-dollar project for Los Angeles. This means that additional policies or projects that focus on the entire metropolitan area will be necessary, and their main objective will be to reduce the total drivers in Los Angeles. Unless you are part of the small minority of the population who actually goes out of their way to solve the invisible large-scale issue of climate change, you will most likely spend the majority of your life travelling in the most efficient and direct way possible. This is exactly what keeps Los Angeles' residents on the city's roads and highways, but is also what helps to diversify the methods of transport in London. According to a 2019 study, Londoners take more trips using public transport than private transport. When considering all other sustainable methods, this is 63.2% of journeys, and when compared to Los Angeles' score of 10.3%, it is clear to see that London knows what it is doing when it comes to public transport, and quite frankly, it seems like Los Angeles could do with some tips. Don't get me wrong, I am fully aware of the differences between London and Los Angeles. Firstly, London is much denser, and has been built with public transport in mind, rather than just cars. London is also made up of several interconnected towns, rather than the sprawling suburbs of Los Angeles that don't have properly defined centres or borders. Overall, this fundamentally alters the potential for public transport implementation, but nevertheless, there is nothing stopping Los Angeles from implementing a low-emissions zone, and using the funds gained from it to start building a fully realised public transit system, albeit on a smaller scale than London. To carry this out properly, it is important to understand the travel demands of Los Angeles' residents. Their main priorities are to travel to their destinations with ease, not necessarily walk for too long, and do this with minimal costs and time constraints. Cars perfectly fulfill this role in Los Angeles, which is why they dominate the city. But if we were to match the priorities of residents with a newer, more environmentally friendly method of transport, it would make a huge difference. Let's look at a few examples. Example number 1, buses. Buses are good for commuting, as they are much easier to implement than trains and metros, but are still a solid way of getting people to different areas. Buses can be used to bridge the gap between longer train and metro journeys, and when used in tandem with other methods of transport can work very well. However, if underfunded, buses can be expensive and irregular, making them ineffective at meeting the priorities of travellers. Example number 2, bicycles. Bikes are good for distances that are too long to walk but unnecessary to drive. They act as a healthy, enjoyable activity to partake in that has the added benefit of getting you from point A to point B. However, they are heavily dependent on the right terrain and infrastructure. This means that they are quite situational, and speaking from the perspective of the average person who isn't an experienced or versatile cyclist, I find it difficult to travel this way unless the majority of my journey is made up of cycle lanes with barely any hills or inclines. Luckily, apart from the northern reaches of the city, Los Angeles is pretty flat, so could definitely accommodate for cycling infrastructure, and already has in many cases. Example number 3, metros. The metro is a brilliant way of quickly, efficiently and consistently transporting people throughout a city. Unlike most other forms of transport, the metro does not obey the inferior rules of the surface world, tunnelling underneath urban sprawl and linking all the city's districts together in a web of coloured lines. Metro systems are much more effective and frequented by civilians if they are guaranteed to arrive consistently. It's the difference between rushing to catch the next metro because the one after is in 20 minutes, or leisurely strolling to the platform, which will have an arrival in a matter of seconds. At their best, metros outperform cars in meeting the priorities of travellers, and at their worst, you'd be better off jogging. Overall, while these methods are currently being utilised in Los Angeles, they will need more funding to accommodate for more people in the city. My idea to provide this funding is by using an ultra-low emission zone that will gradually expand from the city centre. Cars within the ULEZ zone that emit too much carbon will be given a fee to pay. By using the money gained from the ULEZ zone's fees for higher carbon emitting vehicles, Los Angeles will be able to decrease the number of automobiles on its roads and highways, while giving these commuters a higher frequency of alternative options. This method is used by Transport for London, and serves as a smooth transition between an era of car dominance and public transport dominance. The current benefits that the ULEZ has contributed towards in London include an almost 50% decrease in toxic nitrogen dioxide pollution in central London, and an 800-ton decrease in CO2 emissions between 2019 and 2022. This means that if this policy were to be adopted by LA's government, they would decrease carbon emissions and form the conditions for a city that uses much more public transportation. However, it is also important to evaluate the downsides or backlash that implementing a ULEZ zone will bring. For starters, Los Angeles is currently much more car dependent than London, and during the transition to less car dependence, public transport facilities may be overwhelmed by a huge influx in passengers. Citizens of the city may also feel forced to give up driving because of ULEZ fees, leading to a disdain for the new policies. However, it is still a scheme that would benefit the environment and general atmosphere of the city, and for that, it would be worth trying. In conclusion, despite having some likely drawbacks and difficulties, the completion of these two projects would be highly beneficial in Los Angeles, especially in terms of environmental and social aspects. While it could be possible for both to work in tandem with one another, when it comes to which one is the most beneficial, it would likely be the Big Dig project. Reasons for this include the fact that large-scale implementations of the Big Dig have already been tested in the United States. The only US city with anything similar to that of a ULEZ zone is Santa Monica, which happens to be in Los Angeles County, but not the city itself. The Big Dig project would bring social benefits, along with the obvious environmental benefits, as opposed to the ULEZ zone only bringing environmental benefits, making it a better contender for change in the city. Despite the Big Dig project having a higher likelihood of beneficially impacting Los Angeles, it would still be crucial to implement policies that benefit the city centre and wider area, rather than just the city centre. As the ULEZ zone may seem extreme to some residents due to its high fees and lack of tolerance for high emission vehicles, it could be possible for the city to adopt a compromise version of this policy. Overall, with the right alterations, these two policies could greatly reduce Los Angeles' environmental problems.
I'm giving you a night call to tell you how I feel. I want to drive you through the night, down the hills. I gotta tell you something you don't want to hear. I'm gonna show you where it's dark, but have no fear.
There's carbon inside you. There's factors at play, like motorization, boy, but you're still safe. We could build a greenway, invest in a trade. We'll fund it with money the US will gain.
I'm giving you a night call to tell you.
The wait for a metro to arrive was a far cry from the ridiculously consistent arrivals of the London Underground. It was clear that American city planners do not respect the metro as much as Londoners respect the tube. The wait for a metro to... This sounds so pretentious. In an article by the American Association of Geographers, the author, Stefani Pinchetto...
Don't say Stefani.
Did I say Stefani?
Yeah.
I don't know, since it's like a foreign name, I just think like... Action. In an article by the American Association of Geographers, the author, Stefani Pinchetto...